Okay, so I probably should be getting on with work, in all honesty. I have an assignment to be trudging ahead with, but this is something that is on my mind right now, and I do want to talk about it because of the quick upload speed of this new laptop and because it's on my mind. I've just come off a kind of discussion, very civil discussion with a humanist friend of mine. Well, the guy's not really a friend, he's more an acquaintance, in all honesty. But anyway, he'd had this meme criticising organised religion, and it was about the hypocrisies of Christian Trump supporters, contradicting everything that the Christian message is supposed to be about. Anyway, it got into a discussion under that with the issue of organised religion versus humanism raised. Now, I don't know, maybe someone can enlighten me here how humanism ties with atheism. Is humanism an atheist position? I.e., is it, because that's my understanding that it is. If I'm wrong about that, do correct me gently, because that was my perspective. I'm open-minded, I like to think, when it comes to matters of faith, insofar as I'm prepared to look at anything. I'm prepared to give anything a chance and to look more into it. So his opening pitch was, I invite you to look at humanism. And I certainly would be prepared to look at something like that. But if it's based on atheism, I have a few issues with atheism that I want to raise here. And again, it's not that I am saying atheism is wrong, okay, because I think these are matters that are, for someone like me, who isn't particularly religious but isn't an atheist either, we're in a position where I think we can be somewhat flexible in terms of what we question, in terms of how we look at things. You see, to me, the atheist mind is closed off just as much as a dogged religious mind. Why? Because their view is it's all a fairy tale, that's it, it's all nonsense. Now, I do invite atheist viewers to refute that. It is your position that it's all a fairy tale, correct? And I'm not saying that is right or wrong, but by definition it isn't really being open-minded, in the sense of, is it possible that there is another perspective here? So let me just present a view. What I intend to do with this video is to lay out that middle ground, that grey area that I think a lot of people are in, because that's where I'm in. I don't consider myself particularly religious. I no longer go to church, except at Christmas time when I'm visiting my family. I come from a Christian family. My father's actually a clergyman, and may as well put that in as a caveat. I come from a Christian family, but my parents are they don't impose anything on me. They respect me and my siblings, just making our own decisions on these things. But let me just put this point. If you have a disaster, let's say a sinking ship, or some other really dramatic life and death situation, people will be doing one or two things. They'll either be struggling to survive, well, hopefully most of them will be struggling to survive, and some of them may be doing that, or they may be kind of accepting fate and saying, we're not going to make it out of this. Now, are they more likely to be thinking, I'm an atheist, that's it, this is the end, that's totally it? If they're an atheist and they have conviction with that, then I guess that's what they would be doing. But I would suspect most people find themselves praying. I mean, I've been in this position myself. I almost drowned in a river in China. I got out of my depth. I was physically very tired, and I genuinely believed I was going to drown there. I shouted for help in English, and a young couple threw a ring to me, but that was, it took me a while to get them into focus. I genuinely was scared, and I was praying to myself. Now, I wonder how the atheist outlook would look at that. Would it be, well, you're just taken in by religious fear? And they could be absolutely right. But the point I'm making here is that faith, whatever you think of it, provides comfort in those sort of situations. And it may be a total fantasy. But put it this way, you see, the reason I've never endorsed atheism completely, whilst I have many valid arguments about all the problems that organised religion cause, about human rights abuses, about conflict, about intolerance, those are all valid points, and I'm not deaf to those issues. But I think that what atheists can't really just dismiss is the weight of religious faith. I mean, you could say, okay, in deprived parts of the world, for example, in rural parts of Pakistan where the poverty level is very high, so is, religious dogma. So you could dismiss that as, well, it goes in hand with a lack of education. How then do you explain in developed countries where education standards are high, how do you explain clergy who also have degrees? How do you explain people of faith who are pretty smart people? They have university degrees, have doctorates in some cases. So to just dismiss all religious people as idiots, I think, is a little bit arrogant and also flippant. To me, that's just as ignorant as saying, oh, well, all atheists are going to go to hellfire. Which is one thing, by the way, because I'm kind of playing ping pong here. I'm looking at both sides where there are flaws and where I have issue with them. So one of my biggest issues with organised religion is the sheer intolerance. You don't believe, so you'll end up being cast into eternal damnation. I mean, those early missionaries felt they were helping people by saving them. But what about the ones they didn't reach? I mean, some poor Chinese peasant or Indian peasant who'd never heard of the Christian gospel. Was it really the position they were going to be damned to hellfire because they hadn't heard of it? Well, surely that wasn't their fault. So there are obviously a lot of serious flaws with religious thinking. There are a lot of contradictions within the Bible. If you look at the stories and you look at the scripture, there are a lot of things that just don't make a great deal of sense. They contradict one another. Can't think of an example immediately off the top of my head, but there certainly are contradictions, and that's a problem when you're trying to sell something. So I do understand where atheists are coming from. But the issue I take with atheists is I believe it is ultimately, on a personal level, maybe they don't feel this way, but on a personal level, I find it incredibly, incredibly bleak and depressing to think, when I die, that's it. Now, I know what happens with science. When I die, I decompose in the ground, right? That's science. But the idea that my soul, the idea that my consciousness goes somewhere else, is profoundly comforting. It is. And I would invite atheists to say, even if you don't believe it, you would at least acknowledge that is comforting, right? You see, what I've heard people of faith argue is, you can criticise religion all you want. It's the men, people, humankind that is flawed, not the faith itself. Because human beings are flawed, so you're looking at religion through the prism of human flaws, i.e. Christians and Muslims and others who embody religion. At the moment, I'm kind of comfortable sitting on the fence. It's not a particularly academic position. I haven't spent hours looking into humanist philosophy or theology. Time permitted, I may do that, but ultimately we are all on the same path. We all live and we all die, right? The world is not a fair place. Why is it that multi-billionaire CEOs who may be corrupt can get away with things and have luxurious lifestyles, while some poor child in the Philippines is, working his hands raw, her hands raw in a sweatshop. We don't live in an equal world. And you might argue, what sort of God is that? What sort of God is it that allows children to die in tragedies? And certainly, I think it was Christopher Hitchens said the Old Testament God is a dictator. I mean, obey me, worship me, or you die. It's a dictatorial mindset. It's a pretty tyrannic figure. Hellfire and brimstone. So as I said to my humanist contact, the Old Testament is a very bad advertisement for religion. Now, what many Christians today would argue is it's the context of the time, it's not literal, it's metaphorical, etc. But it isn't a good advertisement. What I would say though is there are an estimated 2 billion Christians in the world, and roughly 1.7 billion Muslims, close to 1 billion Hindus, and then the other major faiths also go well into the millions. I'm not sure what the figures are, but the fact of the matter is there are far more people in the world who believe in something than who subscribe to atheism. Now, the atheist perspective would be, oh well, that's a lack of education, it's religious brainwashing. But for me, I look at it another way. I think there's truth in that, particularly, like I say, in rural areas where there is, it's just a dogged, blind belief, or you get situations where people are torn to shreds if they question the prophet. That's absolute. That is the dark age mentality of religion. And there will be Christian equivalents, although I don't believe is on the same sort of scale today. But I just don't think you can dismiss so much faith as being like mass hysteria, or it's all in the clouds, it's all fantasy. You see, you can look at things from a fact-based perspective. That's what we do. It's logical. This is the fact. But if we look at how science itself has developed over the years, at one point it was believed that disease was carried through the air, the miasma theory, I believe it was called, rather than being waterborne. So science itself shows us that just because something cannot be seen doesn't mean that it's not there. So to criticize a religion because you can't see it from a science perspective, therefore, is a bit hypocritical, because there's things in science that you can't see, but we know that, we know gravity is there, we know these things. So it seems a little bit flippant to just dismiss religion because you can't see it, because there's no evidence. I mean, evidence, logic, these things are critical to our understanding of things. But what if a higher deity transcends all of that, transcends logic, transcends fact, transcends what we know of the world? And there's a simple fundamental question I would put out there. This has been raised before. Science can explain the how, but can't explain the why. So let's think of the existence of humans. You can point to millions of years of evolution, adaptation, all those sort of things. But does that explain why? What is our existence on this earth? To live life to the full, to build cities, to procreate, to govern. What is the purpose? That's something science cannot explain. It can't explain the how. The why. So, some will say religion and science are always in conflict. I'm not so sure I believe that. I believe you can find a middle ground that isn't relying on hellfire and damnation scripture, but recognises the significance of faith. Now, to someone like Christopher Hitchens, it's pure evil. It shackles human beings from thought. It enslaves people from their own reason. And then from a very religionist point of view, oh well, if you don't believe, you're going to hell. That's what Scripture says. Now, to me, they're both extreme positions. And I don't want to always sit on the fence, but the way I see it is, if I have religious faith and it's all fantasy, provided I'm not imposing on anyone else, is that hurting anyone? Is it hurting me? If I live to 89 and I believe in God at 89 and I die and there's no God, well, there's nothing. I won't know it, will I? And if there is a God, then I've believed. I do think it's a pretty scary concept that if you don't believe, you go to hellfire and damnation, and that's an extreme aspect of religion. And another, just while I'm at it, I think religious dogma puts people off. No sex before marriage, and you must follow the Scripture. That is a very controlling aspect. And you see it in particularly religious countries where it is very powerful, the power of devotion. To give a Christian example, I'd say the Philippines. A lot of Filipino friends of mine, online friends, they're good people, but you can see how much Christianity influences their lives. And that's not for me to judge, that might be good for them, but it's obvious, it's everywhere. Anyway, I just hope I've given some people some things to think about here. Thanks for watching.